Okay, so recently, the Las Vegas Raiders officially moved on from their franchise quarterback of 9 years in Derek Carr, and have most likely begun yet another rebuilding phase, officially marking the end of an era for the Raiders. And for a Raiders fan like myself, who has been unlucky enough to be a first-hand spectator of this slow-motion collapse over the last couple of years, unfortunately that makes me pretty qualified to explain the ups, the downs, and the Jon Gruden that led to the current iteration of the Las Vegas Raiders we see today. So, with the Raiders finding themselves in almost the exact situation as to when they started this miserable journey under Carr, it's time to whip out the ye olde magnifying glass to take a closer look at how one singular organization could continually screw up at every possible corner to ruin any chance of contention under their once great quarterback. Now, our journey begins in the year 2013, right in the middle of the dark ages for the Raiders. And when I say dark ages, my god, I mean it. Because this was a Raiders team coached by the great Dennis Allen that went 4-12, and was quarterbacked by a combination of Matt McGloin and future wide receiver Terrell Pryor. And if you don't trust stats like this one showing that these two were some of the worst quarterbacks the league had to offer, then maybe you'll believe me when I say, this was not a fun year to be a fan of the old silver and black. Simply put, this Raiders team desperately needed a new identity and talented players added to the roster, which is easier said than done, because although due to their abysmal record the Raiders were able to clinch the 5th overall pick in the 2014 draft, that didn't necessarily mean anything at all, as since 2010, the Raiders rarely had first-round picks, and even when they did, those picks resulted in some of the biggest draft busts we've ever seen in trash cans like Rolando McClain and DJ Hayden. But luckily for the Raiders, the 2014 NFL draft class projected to be one of the more quarterback-rich classes we've seen in recent times, with promising prospects like Blake Bortles, Derek Carr, Teddy Bridgewater, and the man who took over the college universe in Johnny Manziel. So obviously many draft experts predicted the Raiders to gobble up one of those star quarterbacks at the 5th overall pick. And if the writing wasn't already all over the wall for a new quarterback to come in, the Raiders traded away Terrell Pryor to Seattle for a $5 Taco Bell gift card and even signed veteran quarterback Matt Schaub to provide some experience to the team. So all eyes went to general manager Reggie McKenzie and the Raiders front office as the 2014 NFL Draft finally came along, where with the 5th overall pick, the Raiders surprised a lot of people and selected Buffalo linebacker Khalil Mack. Now, this was surprising in part because Mack wasn't supposed to be available, but the Raiders took advantage of this potential generational prospect being out there and were willing to allow other guys like Bridgewater and future first ballot XFL Hall of Famer Johnny Manziel to go elsewhere. But shockingly, one member of the big four of guys from this quarterback class was still available going into the 2nd round, and capitalizing on the one consistent fact about NFL history in the Browns being, well, the Browns, the Raiders missed out on arguably the best quarterback in this class at the time in Teddy Bridgewater by just 3 picks, and in a stroke of luck, had the most natural passer in the class fall right into their laps, as the Raiders found their new franchise quarterback in Fresno State's Derek Carr. Wow. So, for the first time in eons, the, at the time, Oakland Raiders walked away from the NFL draft as bandits, and things just continued to get better for the Raiders, as the initial plan to have the disgraced Matt Schaub teach Derek the ropes early on was blown the hell up right away, as Derek Carr was torching the Schaubster in every possible way during training camp, and right before the season, the Raiders had no choice other than to officially announce Derek Carr as the starter for the Raiders going into Week 1, something that none of the 3 quarterbacks drafted ahead of him could say. So everything was going great, right? Right? Well, although the Raiders were debatably building something, you cannot forget that this team still had all the pieces to be in contention for the 1st overall pick in the draft, and oh my lord, did this Raiders team stink, as counting the end of the 2013 season through Week 11 of the 2014 campaign, the Raiders had impressively amassed at the time the 4th longest losing streak the NFL had ever seen, and that was mainly due to some of the goofiest plays I've ever seen with my own 2 eyes. Like, What the hell is this? And of course, this was on top of the fact that the Raiders finished this year with one of the worst defensive units of all time. Thankfully, with the help of the rain god, the Raiders were able to defeat the Chiefs in Week 12 to spare themselves from being on the wrong side of history, but still finished the season firing head coach Dennis Allen and limped to an even worse 3-13 season in 2014. But at least this time it was kind of expected, and although there were obvious growing pains, Khalil Mack looked pretty good, and more importantly, Derek Carr did as well, and it seemed like he could be the first real franchise quarterback the Raiders have had in more than a decade. So, although the 2014 season ended on a bit of a sour note, narrowly losing to the Broncos, the Raiders looked at Denver and decided that, hey, they're pretty good, and our rock-solid defense did a great job allowing 52 points to Sean Hill and the Rams earlier this year, so the Raiders decided to steal the Broncos' defensive coordinator Jack Del Rio from them and made him the new head coach in Oakland. So of course, with the new coach, they decided to completely scrub clean their coaching staff of last year and hired both a new offensive and defensive coordinator, and with general manager Reggie McKenzie still calling the shots, there was a lot of pressure on him to add talent to both sides of the ball to help their young cornerstones on offense and defense. So, first things first, the offense needed some serious help, and the Raiders made it a priority to add more firepower in that department in the draft, and used yet another top 5 pick on Alabama star wide receiver Amari Cooper, and then the Raiders snagged 2 guys from across the bay, one in Michael Crabtree, who will be very productive in the coming years, and the other who they brought in later on, had a little too much a Raider in him, I guess. But above all those signings, by far the most important transaction was snatching Rodney Hudson away from the division rival Chiefs, who would spearhead a very good Raiders O-line for the next couple years. So with a marginally improved defense and offense, going into the 2015 season, things took a rough turn pretty much immediately.
With a play clock at 5, Dalton slings it toward the end zone, touchdown, Eiferts! Dalton's pass to the end zone, caught! Touchdown, Cincinnati!
Oh yeah, in week 1, the Raiders hype train crashed straight into the cement that they played in, as at one point the Raiders fell behind 33-0 to the Bengals, lost their star quarterback Derek Carr to a hand injury, and overall just got pantsed in front of their home crowd. And from there on out, the Raiders basically traded 1 win for 1 loss for the rest of the year and finished their second season under Derek Carr, going 7-9. But there was still a lot to be excited about, as throughout the year, Carr proved that he could step up in the biggest moments and make clutch plays, and add that onto Derek finding ways to utilize his weapons in Cooper and Crabtree, and what you get is a Pro Bowl campaign for the sophomore quarterback of the Raiders. So while the big 3 of C's on Oakland's offense showed flashes in 2015, the defense was still the Raiders' defense, getting involved in all kinds of goofy shenanigans, and when Charles Woodson retired at the end of the season, it looked like Oakland's defense would just continue to spiral out of control. That is, if it wasn't for one singular man. While Derek Carr took the impressive leap to a Pro Bowler in his second season, his draft buddy in Khalil Mack made the jump to an All-Pro, and probably the second best defensive player in the entire NFL, where if it weren't for JJ Watt being alive on this planet, Khalil Mack would get a lot more credit for his nonsensical 2015 season. And just to make sure I hammer home how important Mack was and will be to the Raiders, in a Week 14 game against the eventual Super Bowl champion Broncos, the Raiders beat the Broncos in Denver while Oakland racked up the most sacks they had in a game all season with 5 team sacks. And guess who had all 5 of them, including a safety? This guy. Basically, all the pieces for a great team were right there in place. This team had a bona fide superstar on defense, a rising star on offense in Derek Carr, and a head coach who was, okay at best. So this offseason would be the most crucial for the Raiders in the future. And although things didn't go too badly, this could be looked at as the calm before the storm. The offense was already pretty good, but the defense still needed a ton of work done to it. So the Raiders began by bringing in some okay but not great contributors in Bruce Irvin from Seattle and Sean Smith from the Chiefs. But the one huge deal the Raiders pulled off was nabbing Pro Bowl safety Reggie Nelson away from the Bengals, where he, along with the aforementioned Sean Smith, should help fill the hole left behind by Charles Woodson to at least an acceptable degree. However, the Raiders still had the NFL draft to get done, and although drafting Amari Cooper last year has worked out well so far, literally every mock draft at the time projected the Raiders to draft Cooper. So without a top 5 pick for the first time in 3 years, the Raiders front office had to prove that they could find talent when it wasn't easy, and use their 14th overall pick to draft Carl Joseph. Okay, but don't worry, things get better, because after wasting both their second-round picks on 0.2 percenters on the Immaculate Grid, the Raiders allegedly discovered some inside information on who the Dallas Cowboys wanted to draft in the 4th round. So with a chance to with the Cowboys' plans, the Raiders ruined everything and really got the Cowboys good, stealing their guy in Connor Cook, which meant the Cowboys were forced to settle for the next quarterback available on the board, who... although the Raiders didn't have the most productive offseason, the most valuable thing the Raiders gained was time, as a whole offseason of experience for their young guys made all the difference in the world, and for the first time in what felt like millennials, the Oakland Raiders were projected to be possibly a playoff team. But, I mean, you don't even have to be a Raiders fan to know that we never live up to expectations. And if some dude on ESPN says that we're going to be good, I don't even believe that for a second. I'm going to need to see it with my own 2 eyes on the football field. But, holy hell, in Week 1, the Oakland Raiders set the tone for the entire 2016 season in a positive way. In the opening game of the season, the Oakland Raiders went into enemy territory and played in the Superdome against Drew Brees and the New Orleans Saints. This was a matchup that was pretty much projected to be anyone's game, and that's exactly what it was, with both teams going back and forth with explosive plays, scoring pretty much whenever they felt like it. And with the game nearing its end, we learned 2 very important things about this 2016 Raiders team. 1, they had a sick fetish for getting tied up in close games, and 2, man did this team have balls, as after a late touchdown, the Raiders decided they wanted to end the game there and now, and went for 2 and got it, defeating the Saints after a missed field goal 35-34 in one of the most entertaining games that year. So, the Raiders had won the game, but after a Week 2 loss to the Falcons where Matt Ryan carved them 3 or 4 new ones, at this point the Raiders still looked like a squad with potential, but a team that was allowing 34.5 points per game just isn't going to cut it. And if the Raiders are going to be successful this year, it was going to be because of 2 guys. If Khalil Mack and Derek Carr could step up and shoulder their respective loads, then this Raiders team could be special. And what resulted was probably the happiest 2 months of time I've ever experienced. It was perfect. As the 2016 season went on, it seemed as if the Raiders could do no wrong, as Oakland won every single close football game in the most glamorous fashion, had Khalil Mack leading the voting for the Defensive Player of the Year award, and most impressively, Derek Carr not only took a massive leap forward, but in 2016, he looked like a whole new player. From Week 3 through Week 12, Derek Carr was simply playing like the best quarterback the league had to offer, doing his best imitation of something resembling a prime Aaron Rodgers in just Derek Carr's 3rd season in the league. And his elite quarterback play did not go unnoticed either, as in Week 12, Derek Carr finally officially ranked in at number 1 in ESPN's official MVP ladder. You see, in the Raiders' Week 12 game against the previous Super Bowl attendee Panthers, Carolina gave Oakland a real run for their money. It was a great game, where Khalil Mack had this pick 6 that I missed because I was waiting in line for a hot dog, which was a huge mistake because, oh boy did I pay a hefty price for that hot dog later on, which... But anyways, back on track. In this game, Derek Carr ended up breaking his finger, which wouldn't be revealed until after the season, and this was an injury that obviously takes multiple weeks to heal, but Derek Carr was not going to let this season, and hell, even this game, pass him by, and he returned against the Panthers with a glove on to help lead Oakland to a 35-32 victory. And of course, if you're playing with a broken finger, especially as a quarterback in the National Football League, your play is going to suffer, and Carr was not immune to that fact, as over the next 2 games, the Raiders went 1-1, with Carr's play going from arguably the best in the NFL this is not the same quarterback at all, as DC was physically unable to take a single snap from anything other than the shotgun or pistol formation. Which leads us to week 16 of 2016, a game and even a day where I remember pretty much everything about for all the wrong reasons. And this would be a game that would change both Derek Carr as well as the Oakland Raiders as a franchise trajectory forever. This is not going to be easy for me, but it's week 16. The Indianapolis Colts, led by Andrew Luck and... oh, nope, just Andrew Luck, came into Oakland desperately needing a victory to keep their bleak playoff hopes alive, while at the same time, the Raiders also needed this win to keep up with the division rival Kansas City Chiefs, who had surpassed them record-wise with a tiebreaker. So, to start this ever-important game, maybe we were all just worrying a little too much, as the Raiders looked like their old selves again, burying the Colts 12 feet under and writing their memorial speech in just the early third quarter. So with Oakland holding a near unlosable 33-7 lead in the second half, the only thing left to do is pull your starters when the time is right and coast to an easy win. Right, Jack? Right, Jack? Take your already injured quarterback out of the game, right, Jack? There were pleas, there were cries, but Jack Del Rio just didn't listen and kept in his injured MVP quarterback just to run the ball when he couldn't even take a snap from under center. And just like that, the entire Raiders' future was flipped upside down in one play, and all hopes and dreams I've had for this organization were exterminated in one singular play.
It's broke! It's broke! It's broke! It's broke! It's broke! It's broke!
It's broke. With just two simple words, everything changed. Derek Carr, the man who had gotten progressively better year by year, had his junior season ended right then and there, as a broken fibula would keep DC out for the remainder of the 2016 season. Although the Raiders would win the game, it didn't matter, and walking out of that stadium on that day was the quietest and most depressing Christmas Eve atmosphere you'll ever experience. But unfortunately, the show must go on, and just 1 week later, with another injury to backup quarterback Matt McGloin against Denver, perhaps all hope wasn't lost, as Connor Cook, the Raiders' rookie quarterback who they purposely stole from the Dallas Cowboys, had his chance to save the Raiders season and clinch a first-round bye. And well, it turns out that Connor Cook was no Dak Prescott, or anything close, as the Raiders got annihilated by Denver and came into a wild-card game against the Houston Texans with as little confidence as a 12-win team will ever have. In just 2 weeks, the once immortal Oakland Raiders, led by the most dangerous wide receiver duo in the league, the Defensive Player of the Year, and the seemingly inevitable MVP of the NFL, had been torn down, ripped apart, and subjected to putting hope into a fourth-round rookie quarterback by making him the first modern QB to have his rookie debut in the playoffs to try and get their first playoff win since the 2002 season. And not that anything more was necessary, but the Raiders' Pro Bowl left tackle Donald Penn, who had been a 9-year veteran at this point, was forced to miss his first ever NFL game against the Texans with a knee injury, which meant backup tackle Menelik Watson was forced to block Jadeveon Clowney all game long, which went about as well as you'd expect, and with Connor Cook playing like a rookie in his first ever start, predictably the Oakland Raiders' best season record-wise since 1976 was ended to Brock Osweiler and the Texans in a 27-14 game that was never even close. Now, besides the fact that I still can't sleep because of this season, people weren't actually too harsh on the Raiders for this year, and the leading narrative at the time was, hey, what happened to the Raiders last year was, it was pretty unlucky, and it probably won't happen again, so since this team is still young, they should be able to compete for at least an AFC Championship game going into the 2017 season. Well, the offseason started off on an unpredictable note, as the Raiders decided to fire offensive coordinator Bill Musgrave after just 2 successful seasons on the job because, well, Jack Del Rio felt like it, and then made up for that decision by bringing in yet another old former Seattle Seahawk in Marshawn Lynch to take over the backfield, and of course another 49er in Navarro Bowman later in the season. Fantastic. Yeah, that is exactly what the Raiders needed to be pushed into contention in 2017. And to make things even better, the 2017 NFL Draft went perfectly according to plan, as the Raiders drafted absolutely nobody of note and wasted every single draft pick available to them. But come on, none of this really matters, right? I mean, as long as Derek Carr and the rest of the Raiders' same offensive core and Khalil Mack continue to dominate, everything will be back to normal, and the Raiders tried to give their star quarterback a little more incentive to get healthy by handing their still injured quarterback a 5-year, $125 million deal. So although once again the Raiders debatably didn't have the greatest offseason in the NFL, come on, who's the judge of that? And with the same guys still there and ready to go, most people had the Raiders as winners of the AFC West. And through the first 2 weeks of the 2017 season, the Raiders beat a pretty good Titans team in a slow grinding game and then absolutely throttled the New York Jets 45-20 with Marshawn Lynch busting out a move in the middle of the game. Except, I hate to damper the mood here, but this was the peak of the 2017 Raiders season. Seriously, it was all downhill from here, as going into week 3, the undefeated Raiders, the team with the highest point differential in the league through 2 weeks, went up against Washington in a primetime game that was set to be the Raiders' coming out party on national television. Instead, the game began with an alleged locker room dispute before the game between Carr and his offensive line on whether they would kneel before the game or not. But although it's pretty much confirmed from every possible source this rumor is fake, it didn't even matter at all, because the Raiders couldn't do anything on offense and got obliterated on defense, as Kirk Cousins had one of the best games a quarterback could possibly have, feasting on the Raiders' defense. So with that, the Raiders lost the game 27-10, and even worse, in their Week 4 matchup against the Broncos, just like last year's Week 17 game, another Raiders QB got injured, and this time it was Derek Carr, who suffered a back injury that only kept him out for a singular game, but with DC not in control of things, the Raiders slipped up for the second week in a row, and just like that in Week 6, the Raiders found themselves sitting with a lowly 2-4 record, and going into their Week 7 matchup with the 5-1 Chiefs, the Raiders were tossed into a early do-or-die situation. No, I'm not even trying to be dramatic. I'm dead serious. People genuinely believed if the Raiders didn't win this game, then they might as well just tank, as not a single new player or coach brought in outside of like 1/3 of Marshawn Lynch had even been moderately helpful to the Raiders' success so far. With that, it's time for Raiders vs. Chiefs, where the game began like most Raiders games do, with a wild 3rd and 10 QB draw and Marshawn running from the bench to toss a referee, but after that, the game was back and forth all the way until the last couple of minutes in the 4th quarter. So with time winding down and the Chiefs barely holding on to a 6-point lead, the Raiders had the ball at the 30-yard line and no timeouts, needing a touchdown, and somehow, triple-teamed old-ass Jared Cook scores a game-winning touchdown. But wait, gotcha. No, he didn't. Turns out he was down at the 1-yard line, just short of the end zone. So the Raiders proceeded to score another touchdown, but gotcha. Offensive pass interference. Then on the next play, Derek Carr throws an incomplete pass. Game over. Oh, wait! Gotcha. More laundry. Well, I guess we got to redo the play. I sure hope the same thing doesn't happen again. Oh, gotcha. It does happen again. More flags. All right, this is it. Final play of the game. Raiders season is still on the line, mind you, and Carr rolls out to his left and finds Michael Crabtree for the official game-winning touchdown. Well, that was a football game, and immediately following that Thursday night matchup, the Raiders used their newfound adrenaline and confusingly won 4 out of their next 6 games and were in position to control their own destiny to have a shot at the playoffs. However, the Chiefs ended up getting revenge on the Raiders at home, winning 26-15, ending the game almost immediately, making their final home game of the season against the Dallas Cowboys the following week the Raiders' last stand if they would choose to have one. And just like the Chiefs game, this game was close down to the last minute as well, with the Raiders' defense, of all things, doing a pretty solid job against a heavily injured Cowboys team. So now, deep into the 4th quarter, it was anyone's game, and the Cowboys put the entire game on the line when, with 5 minutes left on 4th down and 1, Dallas chose to go for it on their own 40. And although it initially looked like the spotting was a bit short, a few angles showed otherwise, and you not. The ref whips out a f***ing index card and enthusiastically grants a first down for the Cowboys. Sorry, a little Raiders fan in me leaked out there, but wait, we still aren't done. As if losing your season to a goddamn flashcard isn't enough, the Raiders got a stop and a good drive going after a pass interference to give them new life. The Raiders could not have possibly been in more control of this game. All they had to do was get 3 yards in just 2 plays with all the time in the world. There was no need to take any form of risk whatsoever. Don't even try to get the touchdown. Just go for the...
Carr, under pressure, avoids the sack, and he's going to try to run it in. Oh, he's going to lose the ball. Yeah, then he loses the ball.
Dude, this play literally doesn't happen. Like, when was the last time you've seen any... Oh, yeah, right. Well, just like that, the 2017 season was over for the Raiders as they dropped their final 2 games of the season to finish 6-10 and had a lot of decisions to make in the offseason as to where this team was going even remotely. But first, let's take a closer look at how the Raiders' key players did this year, and starting with Derek Carr, not only are his stats worse across the board from his 2016 season, he didn't pass the eyeball test either in terms of improvement. And unfortunately, Carr wasn't the only guy that regressed, as alongside him, Amari Cooper fell into a ravine and couldn't get out, as in just 1 season, he went from a multi-time 1,000-yard receiver to not even eclipsing 700 yards on the year and leading the NFL in drop rate. Khalil Mack was arguably the only guy out of the Raiders' important pieces that didn't regress significantly, but we'll get to that more in a second. For now though, the Raiders had completely wiped their coaching staff clean of their 12-win unit from just 2 years prior besides general manager Reggie McKenzie, as they had now brought in another new offensive and defensive coordinator, which would surely fix all the issues this time, and most importantly, the Raiders brought in a brand new head coach to replace Jack Del Rio in controversial fashion, as the Raiders tried to rekindle the good old days and signed Jon Gruden to a 10-year, $100 million deal. Wow. So like it or not, the Raiders were now locked into this Gruden guy, and he was now the dude calling the shots, and man did he start calling shots immediately, as literally right before the season began, Gruden and the Raiders shipped off Khalil Mack to the Chicago Bears for some first-round picks, and then during the regular season, they dumped off Amari Cooper too for more picks, basically telling the entire locker room and fan base, look, there's not much to it, we're gonna tank this year. And you know, maybe we should have seen this coming, as the Raiders barely did anything during the offseason, saving up money while signing veterans in their last seasons for pocket change, and even traded for a volatile Steelers receiver, and then cut him soon after, because reasons. Anyways, the organization and front office made a conscious choice to put all their resources into building from the ground up through the draft, which actually isn't a terrible idea at all if you're able to pull it off and draft talent. And although the Raiders had a bit of a dry streak, they had recently picked up a promising but struggling left tackle in Colton Miller in the 2018 draft, so perhaps this was some sign of things to come. So the 2018 season began, and from a winning perspective, calling this season a disaster is the understatement of the decade, as Derek Carr and the Raiders started the season off just 1-8 through week 9, with their only win being in controversial fashion in overtime against Baker Mayfield and the fucking Browns. And not only that, but by the year's end, the Raiders finished the season going 4-12, racking up some of the most embarrassing losses in franchise history. But wait, it gets worse. Because remember Khalil Mack, you know, the defensive player of the year or whatever in 2016, and by far the best player on the Raiders? Well, when Mack joined the Chicago Bears, he became the main reason the Bears jumped from the 9th defense in the league in 2017 all the way up to the most feared defense since the Legion of Boom, as Mack damn near had more sacks than the entire Oakland defense combined. And meanwhile, the Raiders predictably dropped from the 20th overall defense with Mack all the way back to reclaiming their spot as statistically the worst defense in the entire league. Also, pretty much the most important decision made during the 2018 season was the firing of general manager Reggie McKenzie and the hiring of former ESPN analyst Mike Mayock to help Jon Gruden make the important decisions in terms of roster construction. Now, although our opinions have changed in hindsight, this hiring of Mike Mayock didn't rub many people the wrong way, and actually a majority of the media was pretty optimistic about what Mike could do in the draft room. But before the draft actually came, the most important part of the offseason still had to be done, and that was bringing in talent other than the White Lightning and the White Tiger? Why do they even call him that? Whatever. Regardless, the Raiders swung big this offseason and rejuvenated their big three of the past, and who needs Michael Crabtree, Amari Cooper, and Derek Carr when you can have, oh god, Tyrell Williams, J.J. Nelson, and Mike Glennon. So if there were any concerns for the future, these signings surely silenced all doubters. So now it was draft time, and because the Raiders seemingly had done a fantastic job tanking the year prior, Oakland held a top 5 pick just like they had done in 2014. And this pick was absurdly valuable as well, as the Raiders held the 4th overall selection, and since they had a hole debatably in every single position other than quarterback, all they had to do was select the best possible player available, which was projected to be any of these guys who were widely accepted as the most likely choices for Oakland. The key word there being likely. The Raiders never draft the guy who you think they're going to draft. And of course, the twosome of destruction in Gruden and Mayock had other plans.
The Oakland Raiders select Cleveland Farrell, defensive end, Clemson.
The Raiders did Raider stuff and Raidered all over the draft board and selected a guy who wasn't even projected to go inside the top 15 because the Raider staff liked his character. Now, luckily for the Raiders, they had no superstars, but they did have draft compensation in return, and made their one and only solid first-round selection with the pick they got in the Khalil Mack trade and reached in the draft to get running back Josh Jacobs. And finally, with their first-round pick from the Amari Cooper trade, they cashed that pick in for Jonathan Abram, who covered less field than a wooden chair, but also came with his own, I guess, unique set of skills. But just before the 2019 draft was deemed a completely catastrophic event, the Raiders seemed to salvage their draft later on, drafting crucial pieces to the team in future Pro Bowlers with defensive end Max Crosby and golf enthusiast Hunter Renfrow. So, with so much young talent projected to gel with Derek Carr and like the 3 1/15 competent players from the previous year's roster, some wild dreamers out there fully believed all the Raiders needed to get right back to their 2016 contender form was one more piece, one more spark plug, an all-pro Hall of Fame player to really push the Raiders over the top. And unfortunately, Jon Gruden and Mike Mayock were a pair of those baked dreamers, as almost 2 months before the draft took place, the Oakland Raiders made their second blockbuster trade under Jon Gruden, basically trading away the rights to a very good wide receiver in Deontay Johnson for the services of the best wide receiver in the NFL in Antonio Brown. Oh my god, Antonio Brown is a Raider now? Holy hell, this might actually change everything. Literally, everyone in the media was losing it, sharing the same sentiment that as long as Antonio Brown can simply play football for the Raiders, there's no way this move can possibly backfire. He didn't even play. And not only did he not play, but on his way out the door for the Raiders, the man burned down every possible bridge by himself and then stomped on its ashes in the most entertaining way possible, turning the Raiders into nothing more than a laughingstock for the rest of the league.
Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Let's get to work.
Frostbite is reportedly to blame for sidelining Antonio Brown.
The Raiders free!
After the wild ride that was the Antonio Brown arc for the Raiders, before the 2019 season began, Oakland cut the future Hall of Fame receiver and moved into the season with a black hole in the wideout room, and that showed pretty much immediately, as through the Raiders' first 5 weeks of the season, Oakland started 6 different wide receivers, something Derek Carr wasn't super thrilled to see. These are the words of a man who just wants a singular competent wide receiver to throw to. But somehow, with a bunch of auto-generated guys at wide receiver, through week 10, Derek Carr found himself finally getting in the zone, playing the best football he's played since his MVP season, being uber efficient in the process. But not only was Carr great during this time period, but the young guys started stepping up too, as Josh Jacobs had begun racking up constant 100-plus yard games, and Max Crosby seemed to have his breakout game against the Bengals with an unstoppable 4-sack performance. This wasn't just a small piss-in-the-pan hype thing. No, the Raiders actually started getting real hype and began to slowly but surely creep into the top 10 power rankings. And with the Raiders set to play against the New York Jets, led by Adam Gase and Sam Darnold, it looked like this would be a prime opportunity to stake their claim as a real NFL team once again. There were two doors put in front of the Raiders. Door number one would lead them to pretty much the exact same situation as that Washington incident 2 years back, and door number two would lead them to success and glory. And of course, the Raiders decided to choose door number one, and what would happen next would be the last textbook collapse the Raiders would have in Oakland. As has become a theme under Jon Gruden, the Raiders had become senseis of the art of getting f***ing embarrassed in front of the world just when everyone starts believing in them. As although the Jets' loss was beyond humiliating, the Chiefs' loss was expected, but nevertheless still rough on the eyes. But in Week 15, the Raiders had a meltdown unlike anything I've ever seen, where in the last game in Oakland, Gardner Minshew dissected the Raiders secondary, winning the game 20-16 and ruining any plans I had of having a moderately good week. The game ended with Derek Carr being booed off the field and power tools being tossed at the rest of the players, and although the season didn't officially end with this game, emotionally and spiritually it did, as the Raiders had one last win in the Coliseum taken away from them and finished the season going 7-9, a disappointing end to a once promising season. But the Raiders were still marinating in a ton of draft capital, and going into the 2020 NFL Draft, they had 2 more first-round picks to work with, still just having all the ingredients in the world to craft a truly special team for the future. The first tough decision they had to make was not what position they were going to spend their own 12th overall pick on, but which wide receiver, and they had plenty to choose from. The top of the top in guys like CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, and Henry Ruggs were available. Or the Raiders could choose to use their second first-round pick from the Khalil Mack trade to take a later wideout like Justin Jefferson or T. Higgins. There were so many options to choose from. They literally could have picked a name out of a hat and nobody would have Wait a minute. That is, whew. Boy do I love speed. F*** it. We don't need CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy. This guy's got wheels. So with the 12th pick in the first round, the Las Vegas Raiders made Henry Ruggs their first draft pick ever. Wow, that set the bar really low really quickly. But somehow that bar just kept getting lower and lower, because with the Raiders' second first round draft pick, they went with Ohio State cornerback Damon Arnette, who will become a more prolific character later on, but for what it's worth, and I hate to spoil the surprise, but this 2020 draft class not only destroyed Derek Carr's career with the Raiders, but set the entire franchise back multiple years with just the sheer level of suckitude from these 7 players alone. So we enter the 2020 season, where, I swear to God, the scriptwriters didn't even bother to proofread the script this year, and the Raiders fell for the same exact cruel trick as just last season, and once more, Raiders fans' mental limits were tested again. It is the way of the Raiders. First, they suck you in, as through Week 10, Vegas was bullying teams, taking juice boxes, and pushing people in lockers, as despite their lack of talent on the roster, like any talent whatsoever, the Raiders were able to defeat far superior teams in both the Saints in Week 2 in their first ever home game without fans, and against last year's Super Bowl champion in the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, after this 10-week stretch, the Raiders were set to face off against the Chiefs at home, and people fully expected the Raiders to come right back down to earth. But, shockingly, that didn't happen, as Derek Carr was going blow for blow with Mahomes up until the last drive, and when the dust settled, the Chiefs were victorious by just 4 points, but a casual viewer could have been fooled into believing these were the 2 best teams in the entire NFL. So yes, the Raiders did lose, but they put up a hell of a fight in the process. And now, Vegas turned to their Week 12 opponents and foamed at the mouth, seeing the actively tanking Atlanta Falcons as nothing more than a nutritious slab of meat. This was supposed to be the week. This was supposed to be the week where the Raiders became, a respected team, but You know, if you thought the Raiders under Jon Gruden and Derek Carr were going to change now, then man, do you still have a lot to learn about this organization. Well, in their Week 12 game versus the Atlanta Falcons, the Raiders grinded up their hopes and dreams into tiny pieces themselves and lost a nail-biter 43-6 to a team that wouldn't win another game for the rest of the year. But the season wasn't completely over yet, as with a miraculous win over the Jets thanks to their defensive coordinator Gregg Williams being a hack, Vegas was able to at least momentarily gain some faith back that the playoffs could be a realistic outcome. However, the Raiders just enjoyed the adrenaline rush that came from choking just way too much, and blew a game against the Chargers with Derek Carr injured, and because that wasn't enough, the Raiders had to make sure their already cold corpse wasn't getting up anytime soon, and let Ryan Fitzpatrick hand them one last L to end the season on one of the most impressive throws you'll ever see. And with that, we end the 2020 Raiders campaign, where the team went 8-8, missing the playoffs, wasting another year completely. Now, I know there's been a lot more focus on the team sucking rather than Derek Carr in particular, but over these last couple of Gruden years, whether it be his fault or not, the Raiders just haven't been improving under Derek Carr. So going into this next season, this was going to be the final make or break year for the entire post-Jack Del Rio coaching staff, as well as Derek Carr individually. Seriously, I think I can speak for the entire Raiders fan base and the entire NFL's opinion at the time when I say everyone was just getting impatient. So during the offseason, the Raiders swung as hard as they could, trying to have an even slightly average defense for the first time since the damn 70s, and actually did a pretty good job, signing Yannick Ngakoue, who was pretty okay, and also traded for Denzel Perryman, who quickly developed into one of the most impactful players on the team. Now, before the season began, the Raiders still had the 2021 NFL draft to get through and had a pick just outside the top 15, so they were pretty much guaranteed to get a very impactful player.
The Las Vegas Raiders select Alex Leatherwood.
Oh, no! No!
Alex Leatherwood? Are you serious? The man was barely projected to be a first-round pick. Why not just trade back in the draft? Whatever. Look, Alex Leatherwood was not even supposed to be drafted anywhere near where the Raiders were picking. But the sad part was, nobody was surprised. So as the 2021 season began, of course, the Raiders actually started winning games? What? Through the first 3 weeks of the season, the Raiders found themselves undefeated, including 2 thriller wins against the Ravens and Dolphins, and the man to thank for most of this was the rejuvenated Derek Carr, as now that he had grown comfortable with weapons like Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller, he reverted straight back into 2016 MVP form and maybe more, tossing an unrealistically efficient 400 yards every game while throwing the ball more than ever, while finding himself once more at the top of the early season MVP ladder. Things were going great, but after a little slip up to the Chargers in the bright lights of primetime, the Raiders got small reports showing that their head coach Jon Gruden may have sent some interesting emails a few years back, but brushed them to the side and looked ahead to a matchup versus the Chicago Bears. The game went exactly as you'd expect, as the Raiders got destroyed by the Matt Nagy Bears, losing 20-9 with Justin Fields throwing for just 43 yards in the second half. But if this loss didn't already decimate any momentum the Raiders had going for them, then what happened immediately after the game changed everything, as the entire vault of Jon Gruden's emails somehow found the light of day, which weren't exactly the most PG material, which meant that after the Raiders' loss to Khalil Mack and the Chicago Bears, Jon Gruden was forced to resign from his position as head coach of the Raiders indefinitely. How poetic. So, with Chucky gone, it's time to see once and for all whether Derek Carr or Jon Gruden was more at fault for the team's past failures. And we actually got an answer pretty much immediately, as despite the Raiders losing their coach in dramatic fashion, they bounced back right away, handling both the Broncos and Eagles with little to no problems. Wait a minute. Gruden might have actually been the problem, and now that he's gone, there should be nothing to hold back the Raiders. And you know, from here on out, The Raiders should be able to become a terrifying threat to the rest of the NFL, and from here on out, the Raiders are going to rise up and take over. Nope, same old Raiders. And not only were these the same old Raiders, but the reason they fell back down to earth following their 5-2 start was their first round pick from 2020. The first draft selection Vegas ever had decided to go for a joyride in a residential street completely drunk, and ended up getting charged with 3 very serious charges, one of them being a DUI resulting in the death of someone else. This whole situation was absolutely tragic and shocking, but to stay on the football side of this here, from the Raiders organization standpoint, this was Armageddon, as they had to watch their rising star in Henry Ruggs leave the NFL for good and become the icon for NFL players making terrible decisions that result in disastrous consequences. But if any good came from this situation, at least the Raiders were scared from this incident and will now make smarter decisions to better everyone around them and improve the
Pull up, lame ass. I swear to God, I will kill you. On everything I love, I will kill you.
What? Why? Literally, days after Henry Ruggs was banished to the Shadow Realm, the Raiders' other 2020 first round pick, Damon Arnett, who had done nothing of note to this point, by the way, starts threatening people because, I don't know, for shits and giggles, I guess. And in response to this, the man lost his job for good with the Raiders. And just so we're on the same page here, we're still talking about football. And while the Raiders' traveling psych ward kept up its antics off the field, they proceeded to lose 5 of their next 6 games, including a humiliation to the Chiefs, where they took a page out of Juju's book and busted a move out on their logo before the game even began. At this point, the wheels had fallen off, but this time, honestly, how could you blame them? With the amount of things that went wrong for this 2020 Raiders team, it only seemed natural that they'd be in this position. But here's where things get even more confusing, because after their year looked dead and cremated, after the Chiefs game, the Raiders seemed to slowly but surely ramp up their play as the season dragged along, with ugly wins over the Browns and Broncos to keep their playoff hopes living. And then after a tough win over the Colts following the death of Raiders legend and football icon John Madden, the Raiders found themselves in the final week of the season playing the Los Angeles Chargers to see if the Raiders were worthy of the playoffs. Couldn't ask for a better stage. Derek Carr versus Justin Herbert. Chargers versus Raiders Sunday Night Football. And man, did this game come through with the entertainment, as the Raiders looked pretty clearly like the better team throughout, having a solid grip on a 29-14 lead. But this was still the Raiders, so obviously after allowing the Chargers to convert at least 52 fourth downs, missing tackles, and blowing coverages, the Chargers rallied back and sent the game to overtime on the last play of the game, where, in overtime, both the Chargers and Raiders traded field goals, and in what felt like an impossible scenario before the game, if the Chargers and Raiders tied here, then both teams would make the playoffs. So with the Raiders possessing the ball in Chargers territory, all of a sudden taking a few knees seemed like a very real possibility. And hell, after the game, even Derek Carr himself admitted that that was his plan. But the Raiders' opponent was the Chargers, who I'm sure will get their own video at one point, but for now, just know they struggle in moments like these, as the Chargers called a awkward timeout, allowing the Raiders to reset their offense and pound the rock to pick up a first down, and clinched the playoffs for the first time since 2016, 35-32 off of a game-winning field goal. With that, Derek Carr was finally primed to get his first chance at playing in a playoff game, but unfortunately for the Raiders, they were simply outmatched by the Super Bowl attendee Bengals and lost the game 26-19, getting handed a participation trophy in the process. There is no possible way to define the 2021 Raiders season in mere words, but I guess to conceptualize it, there were ups, there were downs, there was Gruden, there were first round picks getting cut left and right. This season had everything. But now going into the 2022 season, the Raiders proved they could actually develop a real winning culture, and after failing to lure Jim Harbaugh away from his breeding grounds, the Raiders also very controversially kicked their interim head coach Rick Pisaccia out of town and hired former Patriots lackey Josh McDaniels to be the new Raiders head coach. But not only did the Raiders bring in a new guy at the top, but they revamped everything, getting fresh and new offensive and defensive coordinators again, and officially put an end to the Mike Mayock experience, with the Raiders firing him before the draft, replacing him with Dave Ziegler. And when Dave got on board, he started making things happen immediately, trying to beef up a still musty-ass defense with Rocky Sin and Chandler Jones. And in a more noteworthy move, although history doesn't favor the Raiders when they go out of their way to trade for a superstar wide receiver, Dave Ziegler doesn't care and sent a few draft picks for a disgruntled Packers wide receiver in Davante Adams. Simply put, the perfect wide receiver for Derek Carr. This was going to be the year. Everyone expected the Raiders to ride their momentum from the last season into this one and keep that swagger going. And with Derek Carr now at the ripe age of 31, reunited with his old college teammate in Davante Adams, we were finally going to know once and for all who Derek Carr is as a quarterback post his 2016 injury. So it was time. The Las Vegas Raiders were projected to be an above-average team for the first time in over 5 years. Everything was coming together at the perfect time. No more distractions, no more drama, just football. So it made complete sense when to begin 2022, all we got was chaos and drama.
Moreau fighting for yardage. The ball is loose again. Picked up by the Cardinals.
Frustration from Adams and whoa.
There is no change with this organization. And just like how most years have gone, the Raiders got pancaked to start the year, going 1-4, only to actually start showing signs of life until all life is exercised by losing to one of the worst teams in the NFL, completing the cycle of the Raiders. The 2022 Raiders season ended with a 6-11 campaign and was just plain disappointing. And although everyone should be under fire here, there's only so much blame you can put on Derek Carr and the offense that was led by two players who could be argued to be the best player available at their respective position, making the problem clearly a coaching one. And even before the season ended, the Raiders made it clear that Derek Carr was not coming back, showing little respect to their franchise quarterback for the last near decade, and eventually decided to straight up cut Carr from the team, ending an era in Vegas. So, although Derek Carr was never the greatest quarterback in the league for at least a whole season's time and never will be, that's okay, because the New Orleans Saints today are getting a quarterback who is very solid at least, who maybe enjoys his check down a little too much, but one time way back in the day, when Derek Carr sported a silver and black helmet and was paired with a defensive beast, those two made up the most dangerous team in the NFL. But one twist of a leg, one raging asshole, and a couple of very bad decisions led to the crumble of the Raiders. But still, even as a Raiders fan myself, for my money, the Raiders under Derek Carr probably had the most entertaining implosion in NFL history. Anyways, if you like this video, then subscribe, because I got a lot of videos on the channel just like this one. And if you like this video, then you should watch this video right here, where I did a complete career breakdown of Aaron Rodgers on why he never won another Super Bowl with the Packers. It's pretty good, trust me. Anyways, until next time.